Good afternoon, everybody. I'll do a similar talk to the one most of you, I think, have seen for the 2D part. I'll do the 3D part. My name is Stefan. I'm working out of the Esri R&D Center in Zurich, where we do the 3D JavaScript API. I will do the talk quite different, so I'm not going to go into that many details on WebGL, but rather show you some cool other stuff, how you can use external renderers, how we call that, in the 3D scene view. Let's get started. So the way you integrate custom WebGL renderers in 3D is using what we call the external renderer interface. That's different than what you just learned in 2D. The use cases when you actually want to do that is really when you have some type of data or you have some type of visualization where you really cannot use the existing layers or renderers to achieve the visualization you want. And it comes with the caveat that you have to implement your own WebGL rendering, and that can be quite time consuming, and it's really only recommended if you have somebody who knows WebGL and you know kind of upfront what the development cost of writing your own renderer is. And at this point, we still consider this interface experimental until we get enough feedback and see how people like it and how that integrates with our existing rendering. Now let's dive into the basics. The external renderer is an interface. So I'm pulling up the TypeScript code here, but you can write it in TypeScript or in JavaScript. Your task, if you want to have your own custom renderer, is to implement this external renderer API. And at the basis of it, it's really only two functions. It's a setup function and a render function. The setup function here, this is just pseudocode. We'll see some real examples in a minute. Is really there to initialize the rendering engine. We'll give you the OpenGL context, which we already have for the rendering. And then you set up your own rendering engine. In this example here, we are using three.js. So you just instantiate a new three.js WebGL renderer with an existing context. And then the render function gets called every time we render a new frame. And in that render function, unsurprisingly, you do your rendering. And then, importantly, you want to reset afterwards the WebGL state to its default values. So we provide a convenience function, which is this context.resetWebGL state, which resets all the WebGL state to the default state. If you know what you change, you can also do that manually and maybe optimize it a little bit. And once you have implemented this API, the only thing you need to do is to instantiate a new renderer and add that to the view with this function down here. Let's go quickly to one of our sample apps. Oh, yeah, that's not very big. So you can find that application on developers.arcgis.com. If you search for external renderer, you find it quite easily. I'm not going to go into all the details of that example. I have another one where we'll go into more detail. Bless you. But just to show you the correspondence of what I just said in my slides. So here you have this. Here this is the ISS external renderer. We have the International Space Station somewhere around this globe. It moved since I opened that page. It's over there. Here it is. So this is the external renderer the Sky implements. And then you have the setup function here where you see it instantiates a three.js WebGL renderer with some other values and then does a whole lot of magic to set up the rendering and the scene. And below that you have the render function, which gets the camera position from the rendering context we pass in, passes that onto three.js, and then does a whole lot of magic again to update the ISS position and draw some other related stuff. And in the end, calls the three.js renderer to render. Then you might have quickly seen that already. If you have data which changes or you need to tell us in some other way that now you need to actually re-render, there is a function called request render. and that will basically trigger another redraw. The ISS renderer, for example, constantly updates, so it never stops rendering. So at the end of each rendering pass, it simply requests the next frame, because this space station is moving and it's querying the position from a service somewhere. Then some background on coordinate systems. So your rendering coordinates you're using in WebGL, they need to be obviously in the same coordinate system as our renderings, otherwise the data doesn't appear where it's supposed to appear. And the scene view has an internal rendering coordinate system where all the data and all the layers get converted into for rendering. In a local scene, that's the special reference of the view. And in a global scene, it's a nerve-centric coordinate system where the x-axis points towards you and comes out at Greenwich at the equator, so somewhere off the coast of Africa. The y-axis points east and the z-axis points towards the North Pole. And the Earth we are rendering is actually a perfect sphere with a radius of the number you see there, which also tells you that all the coordinates we are using are in meters. So that's roughly the radius of the Earth. We do provide you convenience functions to do this conversion from whatever special reference your data is into the special reference system you need to use for rendering. So that's to render and from render coordinates. Again, I'm not sure if it's used in this example. Let me just quickly search for it. Yeah, so here, for example, it's for the marker object. I have a little red dot, so it converts this position into the Earth-centric coordinate system and then uses that to render the three.js geometry. Then one important bit is that all the math you do normally in JavaScript is 64-bit float precision, so that's plenty enough to not have any precision issues. But OpenGL, and therefore WebGL as well, internally uses 32-bit representation of these floating point numbers. And at the scale of the Earth, you're actually running into precision issues. So if you just move your data where it is and use the coordinates you have, then you will get very large numbers, and if you move around the camera, you will see like jittering effects that your objects move like a little bit because you get rounding errors depending on how the math turns out. The way to get around that is using local origins. And like if you have only data which is at a very small scale at the Earth, you just have one local origin. So normally you just pick the local origin which is in the center of your data. Then you subtract that origin from all the coordinates you have in your data. So the magnitude of these coordinates becomes much smaller. And to get it back, you actually put this local origin back into the view transformation matrix, which will then be added at the end of your shader path, and your local precision is fine. If you have data where you have data which spans a large area, like the whole of the US, then you might want to pick multiple local origins and just cluster your data around these local origins and have a mapping for each geometry or stuff you have to that local origin. Now, I kind of go over the same slides again, but showing you a new demo we did for this demo theater. And coming kind of back and forth and explaining a little bit in detail on how that demo is built. So for this demo, I picked an existing volume rendering engine of GitHub and just created an interface to that so I can integrate it with the 3D scene view. And you'll see in the code that in the end it's a really simple way to integrate an external rendering engine. And the data we're rendering here, how many of you can, well, it's written big there now, it wasn't that big before, but it's a hurricane data set. And this one shows just pressure. It looks a bit weird, but if you actually move the camera down here, you'll see that it really looks like a hurricane. And in that application, I can also look at different modalities. So for example, the amount of rain and snow I have in the data. And so this is a capability we don't yet have yet in the 3D JavaScript API to do these type of renderings. And now I quickly walk you over how this integration works. So first thing we have here, oh God, let me make that smaller, is the application. So in the application, I'm creating my scene, like you would do for any other application you're writing. I'm staying here in local viewing mode simply because this volume dataset is rectangular in shape, and I didn't want to bother with reprojecting it into a curved Earth-like shape. And then I'm creating a bit of UI for the legend you have seen and the drop-down box. But the important part is here. I'm creating a new volume renderer, and I'm adding that to the view, and that's it. Let's look at the volume renderer. So the volume renderer has, unsurprisingly, the setup function, where I'm storing a little bit of context for the legend to render. But the important part is here. This setup.gl function is actually a function of the volume renderer I took off GitHub. And I'm just calling that function, giving it the OpenGL context, and then the volume rendering engine will store that state internally. And I'm doing a few calculations to place my volume at the correct place. So the data set I'm showing you here is from a visualization contest, and as part of README, it's not really geolocated in itself, but README mentioned what the position of that is, so that's what I just took here. I'm creating the bounding box of that one, translating it into rendering coordinates, and then using it to position my volume correctly in space. And then the render callback does, again, similar things. It gets the camera position, sets up the view matrix, and then calls the draw function, which is, again, part of this OpenGL volume rendering engine, WebGL volume rendering engine. And at the end, it resets the state. Let me continue with my demo to show you a few other things you can do in it. So the first thing here, which you already have seen, the data has different modalities. So these are just different data files behind the scenes, which I'm then loading whenever I'm changing the drop-down box. But it's also a time-dependent data set, so I can have an animation. The data set has about 50 different time steps of that hurricane. The way this is done, again, is using this request render function. So when I'm going into the animation state, I'm calling load next volume. No, wait a second here. I'm calling load volume. And the function which selects the volume has a callback, which is called when the volume has been actually loaded and uploaded to the GPU and is ready to render. And as part of that, it has a callback. And whenever the volume has been loaded, I'm requesting a rendering. So that's what I'm doing independent of whether or not I'm animating. And if I'm animating, I'm simply setting a timeout and say, call me directly again so that I can load the next volume. And I'm just then incrementing the current time step I'm having and loading a new volume again. So that way, I'm getting this nice animation here. The other thing, let me show you a few other things which you can do with that data. So I did set up a few camera positions. So here you see nicely the amount of water the hurricane holds, or you can look at other stuff like the wind direction. This is the vertical amount of wind going up or down, and you can see that you can nicely see in some time step that you have really high magnitudes of wind going on here. And last but not least, you also get the temperature. This is a bit more problematic because the temperature has a wide range, but the actual important changes are relatively local, which is why I have this interesting color map here, so you can actually see the small variations in the data. Coming back to this rendering, let me see if there's anything important I missed to tell you. The color map selection is similar. It's again one of the functions of this rendering engine. Whenever I select a new color map, sorry, that's not the color map selection, that's somewhere up here. Or not, data, next volume. Okay, I'm not finding it now. I guess I scrolled past it. Yeah, the color map I did actually hard code with the modality, so I was at the right place. So when I'm selecting a different data set, I'm not only loading a new volume, but I'm also selecting the appropriate color map with that. And that's just one which I prepared for that demo here, which is hard coded to have the same name as the data set. And then I'm also updating this little legend here so you actually see what the color map corresponds to. With that, I'm done with my demo. I'm happy to take any questions or go into details where you would be more interested in. But as you have seen, it's, especially if you have an already existing WebGL rendering engine, it's really easy to do the integration. The most tricky part, in my experience, is really to get the coordinate systems and the transformation right. And then all the rest just falls into place. One thing I should also tell you is, so one little trick I didn't mention here, which I did as well, is that during the setup of my application, I am disabling both the stars and the atmosphere, because this rendering would interfere in these type of horizontal views, because we render the atmosphere after, and that wouldn't mix well with the transparent volume rendering I'm doing here. So I just, for this demo, disabled it, so that looks nice as well. And with that, I'm really done. And I would be happy to take any questions.
Can I see the URL of the first slide?
Sure. Yeah, it's on github.com/Esri. Yeah. I can also go there, so you see it's really the same presentation. You're welcome. And please, that's on the last slide, which I haven't put up, please take the survey. We are really looking forward to that feedback, and it helps us a lot on what we are presenting and also how we are presenting it. So if you feel like you wanted to have more detail or some other things, please tell us. We really read that stuff, and we are going to take it into account for next year. Thank you.